Author's note. This novel began as a response to two troubling global trends. The first is the growing comfort with nuclear appeasement. The second is the steady rise of global political violence. Through this story, I wanted to explore the dangers of both while offering a possible path forward through the idea of the Charter, a political framework built to redefine what a state can be. This book is the first in a planned 9-part series. The first trilogy begins in a near-future world grounded in realism and science, and its later volumes move beyond Earth to the cloud cities of Venus and the scavenger worlds of dead civilizations, where technology has become indistinguishable from magic. The second trilogy carries these ideas into a fantasy realm. The third trilogy unites both universes into one. The Charter and its principles form the through line of the entire series, expressed in its central creed: every life is sovereign. If you have listened this far, thank you. Please consider liking or subscribing to help this story and its message reach more people. Welcome to the next chapter to Mina's Star, about Chih-Wei Lin. She is a ruthless strategist known for toppling giants. She's seen as the heir to the empire, though the founder's son has other thoughts. Chapter 2, Tuvalu, 6 days before Tuvalu Day, 2044. With this quarter's distribution, the Nunavut Arcology's return stands at 18.4%. We will now enter the private session, said Aaron Deshpande, the long-standing CFO of Mirov Enterprises since its family office days. Lean with a silver streak bright at his right temple, his dark eyes steady, he spoke evenly, posture perfectly relaxed. A round table anchored the expansive circular boardroom, ringed in glass. Director Chih-Wei Lin, Mikhail Mirov's chief of staff and protege, tapped a recessed control. Mikhail Mirov, despite his growing blindness, turned his face to Chih-Wei and nodded. The glass fogged, white noise rose, and the room sealed itself from outside ears. Chih-Wei had founded a machine learning firm. Her killer instinct toppled 3M. Then Merck. She was already spoken of as Mikhail's heir, creating insecurity in Mikhail's wife and children. This was a secret board. No statute forced them to sit here, no regulator asked for minutes. They met quarterly anyway, on a calendar that never slipped, with GAAP financials and clean notes because their capital preferred familiar shapes. Corporate governance was dictated by the people in power. They made the rules not to bind themselves, but because the rules were the game. The screen lit with the first agenda item: colonization efforts. Arun's gaze lingered on Alexander Mirov, anticipating pushback. The upcoming Mercury colony rotation to Angkor Vallis won't be routine with late crew changes and a safety officer substitution. Modeling predicts the rotation is within tolerance. Who approved those changes? Alexander Mirov, Mikhail's eldest son and Mirov Enterprises CEO, asked. Powerfully built in his early 30s, breaking from tradition, he wore a fitted bodysuit under a loose overlayer. His posture outwardly appeared relaxed, and his tone was casual, but everyone in the room knew him well enough to sense the edge of danger in his question. Dr. Helena Strasser, the new COO after the acquisition of Skyforge Aerospace, sat straight, hands folded. She glanced at Chih-Wei, hesitated, then said, "Director Lin approved them." Chih-Wei inclined her head once. No explanation offered. Alexander's mouth tightened. "Why is Director Lin intervening in management?" Chih-Wei met Alexander's eyes and held them, neither of them willing to look away first. Chih-Wei broke the impasse by simply saying, "Get your house in order." Alexander broke his usual casual exterior with a tightening of his mouth. Then Sheikh Omar al-Rami, an Omani elder in a crisp white suit, leaned back and chuckled deeply. "If it helps, Alex, the house she's minding, including the vast off-book empire, has already felt her sharp claws." Strasser closed the agenda briskly with reports on Venusian habitats, deep space laser infrastructure throughput, and Arnhem Space Center's efficiency, recommending a performance bonus for head administrator Ben Azamat. Then the next item lit the screen. Security impact. Konstantinos Arvani incident. Dimitra Arvani, the matriarch of the Arvani family, leaned forward in her wheelchair, voice hard. "A member of my family died under EIC interrogation. Whatever else he was, Konstantinos died bravely. He could have told them what little he knew. He didn't." Julia, How did he end up in their custody at all? Did you allow it? Dimitra's accusation launched across the boardroom like a lance. However, Julia van der Velde's reply was infuriatingly dismissive. Konstantinos was operating outside any manifest or docking schedule I control. But my people are cleaning up your family's mess. Van der Velde Capital was not as wealthy as the Mirov or Arvani families, but her family office had influence over critical technologies in everyone's technology stacks. She was the many-eyed spider sitting in the middle of a vast web, and with a single tug could shape events from afar. Dimitra's eyes narrowed. Clean up my mess? He's dead, and my family's blood is on your hands. Insulating our goals from the EIC was your responsibility. And what about the traitor in our midst? An EIC asset named Vellum has signaled Valence 9. Before Julia could answer, Ole Sidorov's bass voice cut in. If we're worried about EIC focus, I suggest a distraction. The kindling is set, and the fire is dry. All we would need to do is light the match, and violence will ripple throughout Europe. With Berlin, London, and Paris burning, they'll be too busy to track our assets. Alexander considered in silence, which meant it was his idea. Chih-Wei focused on Ole, who helped rebuild Europe's military-industrial complex, as well as covert weapons distribution. Chih-Wei knew what Ole wanted. Alexander thought he understood. He didn't. Dimitra exhaled sharply, turning her gaze on Ole. You'd light a city on fire to hide our plot? Ole's eyes narrowed considering Dimitra, and responded in a tone as cold and dangerous as fractured ice. I'd light 10. Better than letting the entire constellation unravel. Mina's star has been detected, but the rest stay invisible, or 10 years of sacrifice are for nothing. The board contemplated their options, but Julia shook her head. Mass casualty chaos invites American involvement. Isidora Ibanez, whose privately held empire fed the world's mineral addiction, let out a derisive laugh. The Americans? She let the word hang. Corrupt, venal. They accidentally defaulted due to incompetence, lost reserve status, and now they'd sell their own allies for another quarter of GDP growth. They won't come unless someone pays them, and we're not paying. Omar al-Rami inclined his head slightly. She's not wrong. The Americans will posture, perhaps sanction a few of us, but commit? No, they've already shown they prefer a neutered Europe to a functional one, or inflict the financial feed to Amber. If we're going to underwrite Ole's plan, I can do that. Terms and conditions are already established with the Green Company or the Volga Group. But once the operation's running, don't ask me to pull the brakes. Dimitra's gaze swept the table. And what do we do about Vellum? The room was silent for a beat except for the sound of the low hum of the privacy field. Mikhail rose, and it felt as though gravity pulled every eye toward him. Let's break for lunch. Afterwards, as Chih-Wei stepped out of the secure board meeting, Freya Madsen, Chih-Wei's director of strategic intelligence integration, handed her a binder with briefing notes for the rest of her day. Freya's surprised blue eyes widened behind her thick black-rimmed glasses as Chih-Wei returned the binder. Clear both of our calendars, Chih-Wei said. Freya, have you ever lived in an apartment with a rat that survived every trap? Freya, more accustomed to palatial hunting estates than predator-prey metaphors, blinked, uncertain. No, there's always one, greedy, careful, a survivor. Chih-Wei's voice was flat. We have one here, and we're going to catch it. First step is figuring out what the rat wants. Chih-Wei turned to Freya and asked, Is tonight your anniversary with Jasmine? Freya's fair skin blushed brightly as she shook her head. It isn't serious like that. We are just enjoying our time together. Chih-Wei shook her head. When you are old, regrets trail you everywhere you go, and having a partner to walk that road keeps you going. Don't be foolish and lose Jasmine Eng. Mirov Operations Center, Secure Analysis Vault, 6 days before Tuvalu Day, 2044. We need to talk. Chih-Wei read the final line, then ripped and discarded the note surreptitiously slipped into her pocket. The vault door to the Mirov Operations Center refused to open because the extreme stress spike caused by the note flagged her heart rate as anomalous against her baseline. Freya gave Chih-Wei a look of concern when the multi-layer vault doors hissed open after the system flag was resolved with a few deep breaths. The immersion-cooled servers burbled as the dielectric fluid flowed and green and amber lights blinked in the darkness. Siabonga Leroux, the technical specialist Chih-Wei tasked with the rat hunt, didn't look up. He meditated quietly while a program's text scrolled on his primary screen. "Hello, Chih-Wei and Chih-Wei's friend," he said calmly without breaking his meditation. Freya Madsen frowned, taken aback. "How did you know it was Chih-Wei without looking?" Siabonga opened his eyes in confusion, glancing to Chih-Wei, then Freya. "She smells." Freya stiffened in affront and hissed, "Excuse me?" Chih-Wei gently placed her hand on Freya's stiff arm and smiled warmly. "He means my moisturizer." Siabonga warily watched Freya with consternation. Neroli and tea tree, same every day for 5 years. Memorable in a clean vault with positive pressure and recycled air. Scent sticks. Chih-Wei brushed away a memory of waiting for her father in Dawn District. The air thick with typhoon rain and the sharp citrus of oils spilling from a boutique shop. Siabonga stood, tall and spare, with high cheekbones and copper-burnished skin. The faint edge of Cape Flats in his accent lingered beneath precise enunciation. His black hair was coiled in tight locks, each bound in matte fiber sleeves to stay out of his instruments. One of his Mirov authenticators, embedded within a bright blue gem hanging from a leather strap around his neck, was flipped backward, his sleeves rolled, and his fingernails trimmed to laboratory standard. "You found the rat?" Chih-Wei asked. "I didn't. They got sloppy." Siabonga tapped the trace on his tablet. "That dip right there isn't just noise. It's data loss. We opened the fiber optic span, and it had engineered flaws. Moisture swelled the water-blocking gel just enough to lift the jacket, and a microheater created a microbend on command. A contact coupler must have been used to grab the data without tripping alarms." Freya leaned in, brows knitting. "Explain it like I'm not certified in quantum telemetry." As if Freya were a lioness, Siabonga carefully said, "Think of the fiber as a highway. The rat built a spot where the pavement has a slight tilt. Most cars stay in the lane, but a few brush the shoulder. If you pull up at that exact spot, you can see what the car is carrying. Last week they grabbed a noticeable amount of data as if they no longer cared, and our sensors lit up. Did something happen last week?" "The beginning of the next phase," Chih-Wei said. Siabonga looked confused at Chih-Wei's response. Freya looked frustrated. "How long have we had a rat?" Siabonga tapped through archived telemetry. "Once I knew what to look for, I traced the first anomaly back nearly 7 years. Same signature." Chih-Wei crossed her arms. "Must be the EIC. No one else has that kind of patience or motive." "Built into the supply chain," Siabonga said. "One of the optical bundles came with the flaw embedded." Chih-Wei's gaze sharpened. "Can we narrow the batch?" Siabonga nodded. "Yes, we've started chain of custody checks. Only a few nodes match the time and location profile." Freya looked between them. "Does that mean we can isolate the number of suspects?" Siabonga shook his head. "Not yet, but now we know what we're looking for." Tuvalu Embassy, Singapore. 5 days before Tuvalu Day, 2044. Asleep in her bunk at the Tuvalu Embassy in Singapore, Chih-Wei relived the moment her life changed. Chih-Wei's second pitch meeting was held in a Zurich conference room with acoustic foam along the walls, flickering LED panels overhead, and chairs that were more ergonomic in theory than in practice. "Call father," Chih-Wei thought to herself as she groaned. Trapped in a dream, she remembered the details down to the echo of HVAC vents and the way the venture capitalist Elin Hammerström turned pages with precision. Elin, a Norse goddess in another life, simply said, "The platform is ambitious." "Yes," said the younger Chih-Wei. "We're building the full vertical. Data, models, compute, attribution, royalties, and IP. But the key is monopolizing the value creators, chemists." Kazuo Nakamura, large firmly built older gentleman, looked over his glasses. "Like AWS for chemistry?" Chih-Wei nodded. "If AWS owned the data, trained the models, and paid royalties to every contributor whose work powered a discovery. The key is to reward chemistry teams directly that focus on quality over quantity, instead of the shotgun approach of the current pharmaceutical industry, and cut out fat from marketing and lawyers." Elin challenged. "Shotgun's unfair. It's a risk-adjusted funnel," Chih-Wei pushed back. "It's a volume-optimized funnel, inefficient by design, and we're the correction." Elin's eyes narrowed. And how do you enforce attribution? Each experiment is fingerprinted with yield, solvent, pressure, temperature, chirality, feedstock, and outcome. If a lab in Zurich posts a solvent tweak that improves yield in a process created in Lagos, the model records the influence. Attribution is automatic. Royalties flow back, weighted by contribution. David Lai smiled faintly from Boston, his image flickering on screen. Spotify for reactions. With better economics, Chih-Wei said. Spotify pays pennies. We generate patents. One molecule can return billions. Attribution isn't symbolic. It is the lifeblood of the platform. Vivian Chen leaned in. Do you have a concrete example? Chih-Wei slid a page across the table. We're starting with boronic acid derivatives because they let us sequence value across 3 use cases: materials, catalysis, and medicine. First, Chih-Wei said, tapping the left column, we start with glues. Boronic acids form bonds that act like a zipper instead of superglue, easy to undo and redo. Heat resets them, acidity changes them, and the chemistry can be tuned to the customer's process. That gives us self-healing adhesives, recyclable plastics, even medical coatings that adapt to the body. Low risk, quick to prove, fast to market. It pays for the platform's bigger ambitions. As she spoke, she tracked which investor leaned forward first. She thought to herself, glues were the appetizer. The point was de-risking with proof. Once they accepted reversibility as an advantage, the rest would follow. Next is catalysis. These are chemicals that improve the efficiency of reactions without being used up. One example is the Suzuki-Miura coupling, a reaction that uses boron compounds to link carbon atoms together like Lego pieces. It is one of the most widely used methods for producing specialty compounds, such as ingredients for medicines and advanced materials. Current boron reagents are generalists that often break down, especially when scaled to industrial levels. Our models predict yields under different conditions such as temperature, pressure, or solvent, and we can tailor them to a customer's process. We have already run simulations showing that customized catalysts can reduce industrial costs by 40%. She saw the tension ease. Numbers calmed them, details gave the platform structure, and this structure meant a potential unicorn. Finally, we push into medicine. Boronic acids can attach to proteins through bonds that are strong yet reversible, which makes them precise tools for targeting disease. That is how the cancer drug bortezomib works, and how tavabarol treats fungal infections. These compounds bind where they are supposed to, and then break down in predictable ways. Our platform moves from improving glues and catalysts to designing medicines. The logic is the same, only the application changes. She kept her tone steady. The science had to sound inevitable. Visionary loses trust, and trust closes funding. Kazuo blinked. So glues pay for the catalysts. Catalysts train the models, and the models generate the drugs. Exactly, Chih-Wei said. The improved margin flows to first-to-post labs, via attribution cutting out marketing, sales, and legal overhead. Consolation prize for other labs is largely covering their fixed costs. Elin's fingers rested on the sheet. And how does this replace marketing? With evidence, Chih-Wei said. The chemistry-industrial complex spends billions convincing buyers. We replace persuasion with provenance. When a hospital, a plant, or a formulation team evaluates a candidate, they see full lineage, which lab, which data, which model. It's trust without salespeople. David's tone was quieter now. And if it works, Chih-Wei looked at them all, then we become the backbone. Like FactSet for reactions, not sovereign but essential. She waited. Silence stretched. Then she added, royalties are contractual. Attribution is auditable. Patents are surgical. We don't replace the pharma IP model, we scaffold it. It was then she saw them. Mikhail Mirov sat at the far end of the table, impossibly young, his expression unreadable, as though he were watching her from across time rather than across the pitch. Next to Mikhail was Alexander, a boy of maybe 10, who had followed the pitch and had probably already estimated the return. Even then, Alexander's gaze was upon her. The dream began to split. The older Chih-Wei, still sleeping somewhere, tried to shout across memory. Chih-Wei, still immobilized in her dream, screamed to her past self. Call father, warn him. Then the phones buzzed. Breaking, Chinese amphibious assault fails. Following Taiwanese independence declaration, Taipei shelled. Airstrikes hit civilian targets. A ticker rolled across the screens. Analysts cite Russia's unpunished nuclear strike on Kiev as precedent. China, emboldened by Western inaction, escalates. Civilian toll in Kaohsiung expected to rise. The dream collapsed in static. Chih-Wei woke, heart hammering, light from her phone already flickering beside her. Her father's number and voicemails were still saved. In every dream, her father the poet's face was blurred, but his last words are seared in her heart. We are an island, yet butterflies cross the ocean, fragile wings held steady by unseen strength. Forgiveness is not forgetting, but turning toward the sun, lotus blossoms rising through silt, insistent, steady toward the light. Later that day, Jasmine Eng answered a knock on her door in gray sweatpants and a stretched University of Sydney shirt, the kind worn thin by 100 wash cycles and a life too busy to notice. Her hair was twisted up with a pencil, and her eyes still carried the blur of sleep. Outside stood Juntan and Kenji Watanabe. Both were familiar, but unusually grim. In a sequestered community of 300, even with routine rotations, anonymity was impossible. Morning uggos, Jasmine said, voice dry. Ready to give me your beer money in next week's game? I'm not here for civilization, Chih-Wei replied as she stepped into view. Her tone was clipped, not cruel, but dusted with the fine edge of fatigue. Jasmine immediately snapped to attention. Jun gave a polite incline of the head. Kenji offered the thinnest of smiles. Can we come in? Chih-Wei asked as she pressed in. Jasmine hurriedly stepped aside, gesturing them in. What is this about? The tidy apartment reflected Jasmine's mindset, which was functional and unsentimental. Casual visit? Jasmine asked, settling against the kitchen counter. Chih-Wei ignored the seat nearby. Someone initiated Valence 9 to EIC from inside the embassy. Jasmine blinked in confusion, waiting for an explanation, then finally said, I don't know what that is. We have a rat that asked the EIC for exfiltration, Chih-Wei said evenly, and that someone used a contact coupler on the internal fiber. The flawed fiber, also from the EIC, had an engineered microbend with just enough tilt in the photons to whisper without tripping alarms. Jasmine crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes. I know you are Freya's boss, but is there an accusation in there? Chih-Wei stared in silence, and after a hard count of 10 asked, How long have you been working for the EIC? How did you signal Valence 9? Jasmine's face began to darken in anger. Director Lin, I work for Mirov Enterprises, and despite my marketability, I work solely here. Kenji, quiet until now, held up a sealed sample container. We need the cat's litter. Jasmine blinked, then gave a loud, barking, incredulous laugh. You're serious? Jun sheepishly added. Everyone is treated as a suspect, even the cat. Jasmine shook her head and walked to the composting bin near the wall. She opened it, extracted a sealed liner, and handed it over. Cleaned an hour ago. Minu's regular. You'll find plenty. Kenji nodded and bagged and sealed it without comment. A blur of gray fur shot from beneath the bed. Jasmine's cat, Minu, darted between Jun's boots, skirted the corner post, and vanished through the open door into the corridor beyond. Jasmine began to chase, but Chih-Wei's voice was firm. Don't. Jasmine stopped immediately, but outrage radiated from her. Kenji whispered that he would help her find the cat afterwards. Jasmine looked torn. She's not tagged. She twice chewed out the chip. She's a survivor, not a pet. Duct crawler from Taipei. Feral for 2 years before I earned her trust. She'll come back, Jun offered, not unkindly. No, Jasmine said. Not until she decides this space is safe again. That's not a timeline I control. There was no plea in her tone, only sharp frustration, closely held and tightly wrapped. Chih-Wei watched her carefully. No excess emotion, no cover story. Just lived detail and an edge of helplessness rare for someone usually so composed. Jasmine took a moment to compose herself. Director Lin, I have only done my job to the best of my ability. If you have no other questions, then I have a long list of tasks that I would like to complete before Tuvalu Day. Chih-Wei paused at the threshold as everyone began to file out. Her voice was dry but no longer sharp. I haven't slept in 40 hours, Jasmine. I'm chasing shadows with teeth. If I made a mistake, I'll own it. If you're clean, stay that way. And this was all me. Freya had nothing to do with this. Then they were gone. Afterwards, Chih-Wei received a text confirming there were no anomalies in Jasmine's authenticator telemetry. She crossed Jasmine off her list. Though unease lingered, her instincts rarely misfired. She marked Jasmine for secondary review anyway, then turned back to Julia's message. We need to talk about Mikhail's dead man's switch. Chih-Wei considered her options, then sent Freya a text telling her to connect with Julia's CFO to compile transaction data using bank acquisition diligence data. There was only one person who could untangle Mikhail's dead man's switch, and Chih-Wei felt the full weight of her betrayal, not only of her mentor, but of herself. She closed her eyes, steadied her breath, and braced for the bitter road she had to walk after Tuvalu Day.